Welcome to Human Histories.
God bless you all. God save the King.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Publius Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions! Hi guys, welcome to Human Histories. I'm your host, Ashton Myers, joined today by the other host, because he is the other host, I'm the important one, Riley Osborne. Today we're going to be talking about the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. Riley, take it away.
As always, man, couple quick ways to support the show. First thing you can do is hit that follow button because we're here every week. Another thing you can do for $0 is give us a nice 5-star review. If you don't want to give us a 5-star review, just don't give a review. Please. But also, you can just go right over to the website, humanhistoriespodcast.com, and you can either donate to the show, buy some of the books that we use, and we'll get some affiliate link support from that. And you can also shoot us some questions at humanhistoriespodcast.com. And that's kind of it, man. Just enjoy the show more than anything. We'd love to hear from you guys. Follow us on Instagram. You can shoot us DMs there if you'd like to do that instead of email. And we'll try to get back to all of you. We'd love to do like a question and answer episode one of these days. So just shoot us your questions and we'll hopefully record an episode about it, or we'll just answer you right away. Either way, we got a cool one for you. We got the incredible Battle of the Teutoburg Forest, which is pretty exciting. So yeah, let's dive right into this, Ashton.
100%. Brief note beforehand. This is the first of our, I guess you could call them possibly abridged Human Histories episodes, where we, those of you who have listened previously, you know, you've checked out the Battle of Marathon or the Ionian Revolt, and every character we give them their due diligence, give them enough of the backstory that's necessary. Well, we're taking a slightly different direction here, where we want to. It's more for sustainability for us. It's going to be more focused on the events, less than the people. So if you're interested in the people, we'll still mention them. And and if you want to know more about them, like Riley said, let us know, and maybe we'll do a full deep dive episode on the individuals. But yeah, so here we go. Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. First, to give you guys some backstory, because it's always necessary. After the conquest and incorporation of Gaul, which was France, Belgium, etc., like modern day, incorporation of Gaul into the Roman Empire at the hands of Julius Caesar, a natural border, the Rhine River, had separated two distinct lands. To the west, all of Gaul and Rome's holdings. To the east, unconquered and unfamiliar lands, rife with barbarians and their uncivilized practices. It would not be long until Augustus, now the princeps, or emperor of Rome, the first, would seek to expand Roman influence further, establishing another province in the space between the Rhine River and the Elbe River, which would be modern-day Germany, because, you know, empires, they need to grow. It's built on a growth model. And this would officially begin in 12 BCE, when Augustus would task Drusus, his adopted son, to begin the subjugation of Germania. Drusus would find success, and before his death in 9 BCE, he had conquered vast swaths of Germania. The region had remained relatively calm, aside from a few minor uprisings, but regardless of this fact, in 4 CE, so 17 years after Drusus' initial conquest, Augustus would order another of his adopted sons, actually not adopted son, son-in-law, or stepson, I believe. It was the son of his wife, Tiberius, to complete the subjugation of Germania. This was done in an effort to make the province completely taxable.
If I can just bring a point here, what we talked about when we said that Drusus had quote-unquote subjugated Germania is this wasn't the same level of subjugation that Gaul was under. So the point is, you know, they'd subjugated Germania to the point where they could sort of move troops with relative ease and low risk of getting attacked, right? And they were establishing forts and trading posts and things that were Roman, but they really had not established like a solid Roman government within the area, right? Yeah, and that's what they're trying to expand into it now with this second move, is they're trying to really make it quote unquote taxable. And how do you make something taxable? Well, you've got to bring people, tax collectors, and have them be able to live there relatively comfortably almost year round, and establish a defense network for those people. So there's a lot more that goes into this next step. So when we say that it had been subjugated, it had been like, this is the early stage of subjugation. So it's not like massively subjugated, right?
Absolutely. And we'll get to that when we introduce you guys to Varus, because Riley hit on a few good points that I'm going to want to elaborate on further. Anyway, Tiberius was up to the task and had begun preparations to do so. However, before he would be able, a revolt had broken out, more serious than those prior, because revolts literally pop up all the time when you have as much land as Rome does, or as Persia used to. It occurred in the province of Illyria, and it had been dubbed the Bellum Battonianum, or the Great Illyrian Revolt. And this would end up being a 3-year military campaign, and in order to succeed in putting down the revolt, Tiberius would have to maneuver 8 of the 11 legions stationed in Germania to Illyria. And, 8 out of 11, you're like, oh, they only have 11? Well, for context, at this time, a Roman legion consisted of around 5,300 men, excluding auxiliary forces. So this would have diminished Roman strength in the region from 58,300 men to a mere 15,900. That's pretty substantial, right? Like when you have that large of a force, and as Riley said, this population was not completely subjugated, right? There was some treaties, there was some, like, you were allied with some tribes were still trying to have power grabs and take out other people, and now you just lost your police force, essentially, right? You lost your presence, and that's not going to go unnoticed.
Well, it's also tough because when you're dealing with Germania, which is just a vast amount of different tribes at the point, like, some tribes might enjoy your presence, some tribes might be impartial, and then other tribes might hate you. But Germania is not some unified front by any stretch of the imagination at this point, right? And so the objective in Germania was, however, it still remained. So even though they've got this diminished military there, they still have the same objective. And at this point, the command of the province would fall on a man named Publius Quintilius Varus. Quintilius? Yeah.
Quintilius, yeah.
Quintilius Varus, yeah. Or Varus. I'm just going to call him Varus for the rest of the podcast. Varus had previously been a governor of Africa and Syria. And Syria had been a very difficult area to govern. And he was allegedly known at this time for his cruelty and high taxation, as well as his administrative expertise in the ability to quell uprisings. It was also noted that he wasn't really, and this is retroactively noted, that he was not, by any stretch of the imagination, a great military leader, even though he was a great administrator.
It's very easy to put down a revolt in a place where you have 6 legions and forts everywhere, and they have a diminished presence, and you've been there for 100 years, right? It's like, oh, I'm the best at this, and it's like, buddy, like, a child could do that,
Yeah, I mean, military general, like, good generals are the guys that can pull out victories when they're not overwhelmingly overpowering their enemies, right?
The generals take the province, the administrators just run it. Let's put it like that, right?
Exactly, yeah. And if you have a massive military force and you're dealing with small uprisings, sure, you'll be able to pad your resume by saying, hey, look at all these uprisings that I've quelled, but he's really not dealing with anything that anyone else couldn't have dealt with. Pretty much anyone that had solid administrative ability and the resources he had within the regions that he was doing well would have done great. But now retroactively, we can see that he was by no means a very strategic general when it comes to his leadership.
Well said.
Thank you. So he would be roused out of retirement in 6 CE, when Augustus would appoint him the first official governor of Germania. So it's worthy to note that at this time, though they still had much conquering to do, in 6 CE, Tiberius had claimed that Germania was conquered. But this was not the case. There was over 50 Germanic tribes, and though Romans may have had the cooperation of some, the majority were deeply unsettled at the thought of a Roman rule.
And 3 years later, in September of 9 CE, Varus would begin the move from his summer quarters in Vetera to where he would winter in, bear with me, guys, Mogontiacum. Oh, that was... Anybody speak Latin? He would never reach it, however, as word from a trusted German auxiliary commander, Arminius, would deviate for him from his path, leading to the Teutoburg, or what it's also known as, Varian disaster. Imagine messing up that big, that, like, the Varian disaster. It's like, bro, like, come on, you really messed up here.
I mean, as we dive further into this episode and into this battle, you see that it really is the mistake of this man, right?
Yeah.
Like, they weren't massively outnumbered. They weren't massively strategically outmaneuvered. It was the fact that he was just, for lack of better words, a bit of an idiot when it came to his generalship and very egotistical. And I think that to touch back on his previous rulings in Syria and the other places that he was governor of, I think he got comfortable. I think he definitely got comfortable with his leadership style and his faith in his Roman legions being essentially untouchable, which we will see was not the case.
And to build on that, it's actually, in my fabulous book here, The Legions of Rome, I was just reading prior to the episode, reviewing rather. He actually, while he was in Germania, contrary to what other generals might have done by consolidating power, he had the misconception, as we previously stated, that it was already a subjugated province, and he spent 3 years instead of going around the province consolidating power, making relationships, etc. Like Tiberius rarely fought with them. He cooperated with them, right? He'd set up treaties, set up deals, say, hey, you get this land, you protect this frontier, we'll take care of you guys here, etc. Varus took it upon himself to go around acting like the legislator. Like he would go and try to settle disputes between tribes and have these courtrooms, etc. So that you could see how there's no respect gained from him, and they don't feel a threat from him. Whereas Tiberius will come in and be like, hey, we can crush you guys, but we want to make a deal because we don't need to lose any blood on this day. Like Varus would walk in and say, hey, do you guys got any problems I can help you fix? Because I'm obviously way better than you at this because I'm a Roman. So sit down and let daddy take care of this. So, and then they're not going to think, oh, this guy's not going to fight us, right? This guy's not capable of that. On top of that, similar to what he was historically known for in Syria and Africa, he would go around implementing unrealistic and unfair punitive measures and high taxation, demanding tribute, etc. So he was all around kind of just a dick, right? Like he wasn't. And
he's doing this. He's doing this against a very newly subjugated population.
Yeah.
So this is guys that their dad would have been on the receiving end of the military campaign, and
Drusus,
then right, and then right away, they're dealing with this new guy coming in, and for a couple of years he's just being very tyrannical, but they're like first generation subjugated to Rome after living here as tribes for probably a couple thousand years at that point, right?
Yeah, and it's vastly different than the subjugation that the Gallic people, the Celts, who are similar to the Germans, would have faced under Julius Caesar, because that, as much as I love Julius Caesar, it was essentially a Holocaust. They didn't have the manpower, nor did they have the will to fight after what had happened to them 40 years prior, which wasn't occurring here. But anyway, back to it. Who exactly was Arminius, Riley? You can tell me.
So Arminius, remember back to 12 BCE when Augustus had sent Drusus to conquer Germania? So during that time, Drusus had subjugated a German tribe named the Cheruscans, or Shrusians, however you want to pronounce that.
I just said Cheruscans because I'm an English speaker who bastardizes every other language. So
yeah, I mean,
Cheruscans.
It's old German. I don't even know how a German would pronounce that.
Yeah.
And as a result, the Cheruscans chief Sigimer, in a pledge of the allegiance to Rome, would send their prince Arminius, or Herman, to Rome as a hostage. And hostage really does not mean what it would mean nowadays. Hostage is essentially just like a political, I'm trading you, my guy, so that you know that I have liability. If I try to do anything, you have my guy. But really, he's treated very well. During his time in Rome, Arminius would be Romanized. He would learn Latin, receive an education, eventually serving in the Roman military. He would reach the rank of equestrian, essentially a Roman rank for a knight, the class below senatorial class. He was, if it isn't obvious, a Roman citizen. So hostage is definitely a very modern term, but back then it was a very different thing. Yeah, it's collateral, exactly. But they treat him great, and Arminius learns Roman ways, and he's really well liked. So he would aid Romans in the Illyrian revolt, which we touched on earlier, serving under Tiberius, and with distinction. So around 8 CEE, however, Arminius would be moved to the Rhine, which we know was under the control of Varus, and he was tasked with aiding Varus in the assimilation of Germanic tribes east of the Rhine in central Germany. So this is really where his opinion on Romans starts to shift, is when he's dealing with Varus and seeing how Varus is treating his people, including his father and his native people, right? He gets to revisit his home and his home Germanic tribe. And fooling Varus, they had allowed Varus to believe that they were solidified allies of Rome, when in reality they were starting to develop their schemes.
Yeah, and in the eyes of Arminius, Rome, they abused the Germanic peoples, stripping them of their wealth and stealing their youth to fight. Not like literally stealing their youth like a witch, like casting a spell. Taking their young children to go and fight in Rome's wars that, like why, if you're a German dude way up here and some Roman guy comes in and he's like, you're going to go fight in Africa. You're like, what is Africa? Right? So you're getting pulled away for a conflict you have no purpose being in. So there's two opinions of Arminius, and truth be told, it's probably a combination of the two. And one is that he was Romanized and he was like, "Hey man, Rome's pretty cool." And then he saw the way Rome treated his people, and then all of a sudden he became a freedom fighter and an idol. But that also could be, post facto, like, look at this really awesome dude. It's also incredibly likely that he just thought, hey, you know what? I have this guy's ear. They have trust in me. I know their tactics and their ways. I could probably devise a plan to put myself in a powerful position and lead this tribe, right? And that's exactly what ends up happening in the end. So it's very easy to assume, nobility in his intentions, when in reality it also could have just been very selfish and arrogant, right? Either way, after secret meetings with other Germanic tribal leaders, Arminius and his lot had agreed upon a plan. As the fall progressed and the Romans prepared to head for their winter quarters, news, air quotations, would arrive. There had been a tribal revolt to the northwest. There was no tribal revolt, and Varus would need to put it down. Arminius would advise that Varus take an alternative route. Instead of following the Rhine River, that he would go north of the Weser Hills, right into the Teutoburg forest. And it was then that Arminius had proclaimed that he will ride out and seek reinforcements. And he did, though they were not for Rome. And talking about, like Riley mentioned earlier, how Varus could have avoided all of this. A nobleman of the Cherusci, Segestus, had attempted to warn Varus of Arminius' impending treachery. Varus, however, dismissed this warning as folly, for it was common knowledge that Arminius sought marriage with Segestus' daughter, and that he was not in favor of it, because she was pledged to another man. He and Arminius had a poor relationship, and Varus liked Arminius, and so he would chalk it up to this to mere gossip. And there's only so much you can say about that, man. Like, you have a set plan in mind, you have a route you followed before, and then you have this dude come and tell you, hey, maybe let's go this different way, and then you have somebody warning you, say, hey, don't go that way, and you're still like, no, that's my boy. Like, we're good, we're tight. Like, he eats dinner with me.
It's tough though, right? Because let's say, for example, this had gone another way. Let's say, for example, Arminius had never betrayed them. That was never the plan, and that he had actually known a faster, more efficient route to get to where they wanted to go. That's how you would have used locals that had been allied with you, right? And you'd be right in doing so. If you had developed relationships, let's use Afghanistan, for example. In 2001, the American invasion of Afghanistan, NATO alliance invasion of Afghanistan, the first thing they did for the first year really was establish a network within the local population, right? And they were at high risk of getting betrayed and stuff like that, but it's kind of what you have to do when you're invading a new territory. So on one hand, it's like, hey man, that's actually a good idea to listen to your local guy, to listen to your guy that he's very Roman, he's a citizen, he's been in Rome for a very long time, he's learned all Roman traditions, but he knows the land. So it would have been clever. So at the same time, it's tough, because now we know, hindsight's 2020, hey, this was a terrible idea, a terrible mistake, but put yourself in Varus's shoes. This isn't actually a bad call, in the sense that, hey, listening to your local guy is not necessarily a bad call, but then when you actually look at the path that they take, it's like, man, like, come on, you had to see this coming. He's leading 3 legions through a small path. And if you don't understand, like, this is 16,000 men, plus baggages, plus, people
Their whole camp, yeah.
Their whole camp, right? Moving through a forest, this is insanity. It genuinely is.
I'm glad you brought that up, that argument, because what I think of is 2 examples that are contemporary to Varus. 40 years prior, right, you had two people who were part of the triumvirate. You had, or 2 of the 3, because we're not talking about Pompey. You had Crassus and you had Julius Caesar. How did Crassus' demise find him? He went to Parthia and sought the help of a local and got led into the middle of a desert until all of his men started becoming dehydrated and starving and lost, and then they got slaughtered in the sands, right? So you could look at that, and even though say, hey, this guy's a local, he's trusted, he's been in and around our cities and our garrisons, maybe we could take his advice. You could look at that and say, okay, maybe we need to do some forward reconnaissance of ourselves. And that's where, Julius Caesar comes into play. Julius Caesar, while in Gaul, on more than one occasion, because he was there for 8 years, if he was unsure of his next move, if he had any sense of hesitation, he would sit for weeks. He would dig in for weeks, and he would send out scouts. He would send out all kinds of forward reconnaissance. He would figure out. He was masterful as a tactician in understanding how can I maximize my advantages and minimize my disadvantages. And one of those disadvantages was the fact that he might not have known the land as well as the locals, but by utilizing patience and utilizing scouts, he got to the point where maybe he knew it even better than them, right? So in this instance, and that's what I'm saying, right, is if you have, especially with the forewarning by Segestus, if somebody tells you that that's the instance, would you not have a moment of hesitation and say, let me send out a rider? You know what I mean? And then
it's really egotistical of Varus. And this is what I was talking about when it comes to him being a bad military leader, is because he has every tool at his hand, okay? 3 freaking legions. Just because we touched on earlier that it's quote unquote not that much, it's still a big military force. He has every tool at his disposal when it comes to sending out for a reconnaissance. And if you look at military tactics, a lot of military tactics have never changed. War is dangerous, right? So everything you do it's not eliminating your risk factors, but it's lowering your risk factors. Varus doesn't do any of
None
these.
of it, yeah.
He literally blindly listens to Arminius and just walks into a forest. A forest, okay? Where enemies could be anywhere. This is the sort of point in this story where you realize his ego must have been quite inflated, or he just was so inexperienced with militaries that he didn't even think about, hey, like Ashton just touched on, there really was nothing that prevented him from waiting for a week at the forest's entrance, waiting for great weather, waiting for his riders to return and say, hey man, this is kind of a sketchy path. It's not actually clear the whole way. There's so many things he could have done. But not only does he not send riders forward, he brings his caravan with him. So he brings his support, all of his caravan and all of his slow-moving troops. We talked about this in the Hun episode where your military is only as fast as your slowest unit. So he's bringing his slowest units with him on the caravan, on the marching, along with his soldiers. There's no distinction between who's doing what. His cavalry are just sort of walking slowly with everyone. It's a mess. It's a total mess. And so this is, just so you guys are aware, this is what's going into the forest right now. If you're wondering what's going on, this is what's heading into the forest. Right now we're at the gate of the forest, and he's got no forward reconnaissance, okay? He's got no idea of what's along this path other than what Arminius has told him, and he's taking that as law. And even if Arminius was a great scout, he hasn't been here for years, so it just doesn't make it retroactively. It's tough to make sense of it, but I think that what I touched on earlier about trusting your local guides, that's sometimes important, but you have to, like Ashton touched on with Julius Caesar, who's master technician, a couple of those guys every millennia. So you gotta take that with a grain of salt. But I'm just saying, in comparison, right? That's a really good comparison, because this is the example where there should have been some things that he should have done to limit his risks, and he did none of them.
And I'll go back to the script briefly. We've covered a lot of this, but just to put it in a nice cogent way, because we just spent 5 minutes giving some knuckles, bro. That was solid commentary. But just so we can rein it back in. As Riley was saying, before we get to the fighting, again, just one last time, it's important to cover what made the Romans so incredibly susceptible to this attack. And as we already said, incompetent leadership was number one. So upon reaching the forest, as they were blindly stumbling into a trap, the actions of Varus made things worse. He had refused to send any form of reconnaissance out, nor did he view it necessary to set up any defensible position. He would have the Roman legions marching intermingled with camp personnel, boasting a baggage train that stretched 15 to 20 kilometers in length. We're going to touch back on this after I get to the next point, because we're going to talk about this section before we actually get into the battle. To make matters worse, the weather seemed to turn against Rome. Upon reaching the forest, they would find the dirt path they were to follow muddied and torn. the area had been suffering a torrential downpour, which would continue during the ill-fated days of Varus and his legions. And the stage was set. The prey had taken the bait. He didn't even take the bait, man. He just ate the whole thing. And the barbarians were lying in wait. So yeah, like just to touch back one more time, he had no reconnaissance. He didn't have a defensible position whatsoever. He didn't have his troops on alert. They were relaxed, right? They were relaxed and just casually strolling, talking with their camp personnel. They arrived at the entrance of the forest to see the path they were to follow already ripped apart and muddy and awful because of the rain and the downpour. And when you have caravans, as we'll see, you're going to have to, you can't walk a caravan over a rutted road, right? You're going to have to fix that, which means that now you're taking away some of your military strength to have them work. Because if anybody knows anything about Roman legions, they doubled as laborers. That's what made the Roman military so effective. So like, it was just like at every possible opportunity, he could have taken a moment to think and say, this doesn't seem to add up, especially knowing the knowledge that somebody had already told him he was walking into a trap. How could you not consider that, right? How could you not get to this forest and say, hey, this looks really unfavorable. We're probably good. That guy was just playing around, man. We're good, right? Like,
yeah, and something I wanted to touch on, actually, I wanted to dive in and expand on. Let's talk about this 15 to 20 kilometers, okay? Let's talk about this, because this is not 15 to 20 kilometers on your local paved road, okay? This is 15 to 20 kilometers on a muddy forest path with 15,000 people that you got to navigate through. So even on horseback, there's probably, I would say, easily 2 to 3 hours of communication time that is going to happen between the rear end and the front end of your column. 2 to 3 hours. So I could attack the back of your column, and the front of it probably won't hear about it for another couple hours.
Honestly, probably more than that, I'd say.
Yeah, I am being quite generous because I've done reconnaissances through the forest, and we would move at about 1 kilometer an hour when you're moving slowly, right? Literally 1 kilometer an hour on foot when you're walking through the forest. It's tough. It's super tough.
The heavy kit you had, they had that exact same thing. Like they
heavier.
Had that exactly. Not only that, but they were literally carrying their camp equipment with them. Because the Romans, like when they set up and tear down fortifications, they don't just leave it. They bundle that up and they go with them. That's why they can dig in and set up a fort overnight. Is because they have all the material with them.
They're not using modern military tents and nice custom backpacks that fit to your back,
all
right?
Compact and ergonomic and centralized in weight and
yeah. So let's say just it's at minimum 2 to 3 hours. If this guy's like the best horseman in the unit, he's able to get this information across. So that single point that I just made there, this 15 to 20 kilometer length of this caravan, that is the epitome of the problem that develops here, because. Like this, that's insane. That's genuinely insane to go into this forest with that as your game plan. And that really shows you, there's two things that shows you. One is it's been about 20 years of very limited resistance from Germanic people, right? There's about 20 years here where you could have done this and nothing would have happened, right? You're just moving soldiers around. Like we said, for 17 years before this, they've been moving soldiers with relative ease throughout their Germanic territory. So that's a great example of developing overconfidence. And overconfidence is a major killer when you're dealing with this
complacency.
Sort of thing.
Complacency kills.
Yes.
And yeah.
Absolutely, dude. Lazy soldiers die. That's a classic term, right? It just takes being lazy for a little bit and boom, you're dead. But let's dive back into this battle, because this next point's really cool. So on the first day, they would simply march deeper into the forest, unmolested. Having to fell trees, create roads, and construct bridges as they progressed, the Romans would become weary. That, coupled with inclement weather, left them exceptionally vulnerable in dire straits. The caravan would become even more extended, disorganized, and susceptible to attack. This part, every time that I read about this battle, that part is the most genius part of the whole thing, because the Germans are allowing them to commit to this path. They're allowing them to commit a day into the forest, because they know, hey, if we attack you at the front of the forest, you can just retreat out of it. But if I let you commit to a day, it does two things. One, there's no more retreat. You're stuck in the forest. Two, it's been raining on your soldiers for 24 hours as they try to move through. They're exhausted. They're covered in mud, wet, cold, all of the above. This is what that's done. And that's genius. And you're correct. The Germans are probably in the forest as well, getting rained on. But there's a big difference. let me tell you something. There's a big difference in your mentality when you're the prey versus when you're the predator. And the Germans are the predator. So they're lying in wait, man. They're okay to get rained on. They're ready to rock and roll. They know they have the advantage, right? Where these Romans are just sort of stumbling around and trying to get through this forest, right? The Romans' enemy right now, intellectually in their brain, is just the forest in front of them. They're probably not even thinking about enemies. They're clearly not even thinking about enemies, or else they wouldn't be in this caravan.
I mean, they will soon, and on the second day, after observing and witnessing the predicament the Romans were in, Arminius would begin the assault. And again, he was smart with the way he handled this. The Germanic tribesmen began by raining volleys upon the caravan. Stones, javelins, arrows, any projectile that would serve to maim or kill. They were positioned upon the high ground, upon fortified embankments, and alluding back to what Riley had just said, I would not put it past them to have gotten, a couple of pieces of wood and build shelters for the weather they were in. Right? They were dug in. Of course, you could put a little bit of leaves over your head or something and just stop some of the downpour. Right? And yeah, they're like, this made it near impossible, them being on the embankments, for the Romans to organize a counterattack. The legions fought best on open ground, wherein they might maintain a rigid formation. Being unable to do so, coupled with the weight of their equipment, made them easy prey. Once the confusion and chaos had set in, the Germans would rush down the hill and begin the slaughter. And Arminius, having trained with the Romans, he used smart tactics in that he wouldn't just send a wave of Germans. He would send localized efforts. He would send bulks of forces at specific points, and it paid off, because what ends up happening is the caravan gets split in two. Right? So now you maybe the rear has more of the camp personnel. They're all done. They're all slaves are slaughtered at this point, right? There's no one to defend them. And not only that, but there's no, having that overwhelming rush of Germans. Say you have it, maybe it was a 5-1, right? It doesn't matter if you even could get into a formation as a legionnaire on a muddy road. You're done for if there's that many men bearing down on you, right? And
well, not just that too, but they would attack certain points, right? And then, like we said, by the time the front hears about it and starts to remaneuver to try to maybe fix what's going on in the rear, which is that attack's already done. They're so late that attack's done. They start trying to remaneuver to get to the rear, and then boom, the front gets attacked. And then boom, the center gets attacked. So they're not just like Ashton touched on, they're not unanimously attacking the Romans right now. They're hitting them in different spots throughout the line. This is so brilliant. This is textbook ambush. Like, it's textbook.
Yep. And once the confusion and chaos had set in, the Germans would rush down the hill and begin the slaughter. At any notion of an organized counterattack, simply retreat back to their fortified positions. As I said, the column would be broken, and those who remained together would set up a fortified camp in an attempt to regroup during the night, where Varus and his cadre would have a war council. Well, I wonder how that went, right? Bro, seriously, man, you were warned, right? Like, smacking him around, right?
Yeah, that must have been brutal. Yeah, they got lucky, and they found some open ground. So while they're getting attacked throughout the day, they get lucky, they find some open ground, and they just immediately set up camp. They set up a defensive structure, and they regroup and try to have a war council throughout the night. But I mean, I feel like I can only imagine what this would feel like. You're 2 days into your voyage into the woods. You're getting slaughtered. You're getting destroyed. It's raining. Man, like, mentally they must have been broken. I can only imagine. Dude, like, that would have, like, imagine how desperate that would feel.
Have you ever had a dream where, like, you're, like, in a castle and, like, you realize there's no way out? I've had those dreams before where I'm in a situation, like, maybe, like, you're in the ocean and a shark's approaching you and you get that overwhelming sense of dread that you feel through your whole body, and then you wake up, right? That's what these Romans are feeling, except there's no waking up. They're about to find the eternal sleep, right?
Boom. So let's dive into the third day. So on the third day, the Romans would attempt to break out, executing a night march. They would push forward in an attempt to create distance between the Germans and themselves. This would be in vain, however, as they marched right into another of Arminius's traps. At the foot of the Kilcreski hill, the Romans would find an open strip in the path, and they would follow. But there was a catch. This strip, while seemingly accessible, was constricted by the hillside. There was only a gap of roughly 100 meters between the base of the hill and the edge of the Great Bog. To make matters worse,
not just a bog, the Great Bog, like that. It was a huge swamp. Like, so that, think, like, again, Arminius' tactical brilliance in setting, like, this is going exactly the way he drew it up, right? Like, this is bang, 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 like, perfect. Continue. Sorry.
Well, it's actually cool because I'm gonna touch in, like, so he's got them. It's almost like he planned on not annihilating the Romans in the first attack. It's almost like he planned on having this happen throughout multiple days. It's crazy. It's like I was saying, how this is so textbook. It's textbook, but Arminius is writing that textbook right now, man. He's doing it, and he's planned it out step by step, day by day, and he's doing it exactly as planned. And this comes down to his knowledge of Roman legions. He knows how they operate. He knows how fast they can move within a day. He knows how far they can get into a forest marching in 1 day and 2 days and 3 days. He knows what their tactics are going to be when they start getting attacked. So he's leveraging all this information that the Romans gave him to use it against them. It's tough. So they've got the Great Bog and a hill, and they're stuck between it. And to make matters worse, as they press on, the Romans would encounter a trench dug by the Germans to disrupt their path. So this is what I'm saying, right? It's like it was planned out to the T. And Arminius knew he was going to be attacking these guys along the way, and then this trench is going to be it. And he's like, this is where I'm going to make my final assault when the Romans hit this trench. So they've got no option but to move forward and no option to retreat. So the Romans would storm the wall, doomed to fail at this point. Varus is second in command.
Riley, you missed it for a sec, but there was the trench. So there was the hill, there was a trench, there was a bog, and then they built a wall. The only possible exit they could have went, Arminius had his soldiers build a earthen wall of dirt and mud. So the Romans couldn't go forward, they couldn't go up the hill because there's Germans up there, and they couldn't go into the bog, which actually many of them ended up doing and
dying.
Adios, right?
Yeah.
So as Riley was saying, I'll let you carry on. Sorry for interrupting you. They just decided to storm this earthen wall because they had no other choice.
So his second in command, Nominius Valla, would attempt to flee with the cavalry, the remaining cavalry, and he abandoned the infantry. He would be cornered and then slaughtered on his attempted escape. The remainder of the legions would share the same fate. As they had nowhere to run, Varus and many other commanders would fall on their own sword, killing themselves to avoid capture. The Germans would descend upon the battlefield and finish off the remainder of the Roman forces. And that's it. And it's almost 100% defeat on the Romans. Like, a couple escape the forest.
Literally a couple.
The rest are enslaved or murdered. Or, as we'll talk about here in a second, freaking ritually sacrificed. It was a bad way to go. I straight up don't blame Varus for killing himself.
This reminds me of, you've seen Gladiator, right?
Yeah.
Do you remember after the initial battle when they're walking through the forest and they get ambushed, right? By the barbarians. That's exact. This entire time writing the script, that's exactly what I had in my mind. It's just that the rain, the constricted path, the long baggage train, and nowhere to go, right?
Yeah, man. So now that we've sort of covered the story, I'll tell a quick funny story. This is totally out of pocket, but I'm just gonna tell it anyways because it's about a bog. You can only imagine these bogs when I was in Germany. So this is a fun Germany story. I was in Germany and it was, I think it was, we were just leaving winter. So when I'd received information, I got my orders that this swamp was frozen. So we were told that it was crossable, and it was not the Great Bog. It was a small swamp, and we were told, hey, this is crossable. And so I'm with a 4-man patrol. We were doing a reconnaissance, and my sergeant, who I was in charge of the reconnaissance because they were teaching me how to lead a reconnaissance, but I had a sergeant with me, but she wasn't in control. I was technically in control. And so we get to the edge of this bog, and it's either we try to find a way to cross this bog or we got about a 3-kilometer detour. And I remember I walk out to the edge of the bog. I look out and I say, okay, it's not happening, because I knew that it was just too soft. The ground was too soft. I'd gone about a foot deep in my boots, and so I was already kind of susceptible about it. And my sergeant goes, no, I'll check it out. I'll see if it's crossable. And she walks out a couple feet into the bog while me and my other buddy are sort of planning a route around the bog. And then I look over my shoulder and I see her very quietly sitting about waist deep in the mud. Hasn't yelled out for anyone's help, and my other buddy is trying to pull her out of the mud. And I remember my buddy, we both look at her, look back to our planning, and then look back and we're like, oh my god, she's waist deep in the bog. And we all have to run over there, and like it takes 4 of us trying to pull her out of this freaking mud to try to get her out. So I've got some personal experience with German bog, and let me tell you, whichever soldier went off that way into the bog did not come out of it alive. That is a impenetrable field over there. So sorry for getting a bit off track, but I love that. I always found that a funny story. So, after this defeat, let's touch on what happened to who survived, Ashton. What happened if you survived?
Well, if those that survived the initial conflict would find no respite on the other side, the more esteemed of the legions would be ritualistically sacrificed. So the officer corps, etc., the important people would be ritualistically sacrificed. Some put on effigies and burned alive. Some boiled in pots and cooked, their bones being used as adornments, and some just being beheaded. And those heads were carried with them as they cleared out the other Roman garrisons and cities in Germania. And, hey, look what we did to your friends. Ha, you better run, right? And, the low rank and file soldiers as well, as any camp personnel, would find themselves reduced to a life of slavery were they spared execution. It's said that some soldiers, though very few, and I cannot stress very few, would reach the Rhine and the protection of the 2 legions stationed there. Arminius would sweep across the Germanic lands east of the Rhine, destroying all Roman forts, garrisons, and cities. He would push as far as the Rhine. However, the Romans had regrouped and reinforced at this time, and he would not be able to cross and invade Gaul. The nightmare of the Teutoburg forest, while officially over, would haunt Rome. There would be no formal invasion for 6 years when Germanicus would arrive and begin his campaigns. And it cannot be overstated how important this victory was for the Germanic tribes, because it completely stopped the Roman incursion into their territory. And this was before what some would argue was the great period of Rome, where you had the period of the 5 emperors, where you had Trajan, Hadrian, Marcus Aurelius, Antoninus Pius. I'm forgetting one. And like this was prior to that golden era. And even then, at the peak of military might, they were like, nah, like this isn't it. This isn't worth it. We're gonna leave. And like to only imagine what would have happened had Rome taken over those lands, right? Because one of the reasons why the German language evolved and survived the way it did, as well as English, and wasn't just completely overwritten by Latin, was due to this victory, was due to the ability for them to maintain their sovereignty and inevitably, blossom into what would have become, Germany. And the same thing occurred, you see, in Gaul when they gained their independence, and in Britain when they gained their independence. Like the Franks, the Saxons, etc., would never have been able to grow and flourish if Rome maintained its dominance, right? So this was not only was it a big victory for the German people, but it was potentially history changing, right? And I want to touch on this point right here. Kind of proves to me that Arminius wasn't as noble as some Germans would have you believe, because he's viewed as a national hero. He didn't intend to stop at the Rhine. He wanted to push into Gaul. So at that point, his objective is complete. He's secured Germania, and now he's like, what else can I take? What else can I conquer for myself, right? But the Romans were like, listen, buddy, you got us here, right? Like, step back. We're going to send our boy, who's conveniently named Germanicus, after you in a couple of years, and he's going to take care of you guys, right? Maybe we'll cover him another time, but yeah, that's telling to me about his intentions. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and even though Germanicus reinvaded Germania, like they never established it as a colony, right?
They never wanted to. Yeah.
It was after that, and something I wanted to touch on. What's cool is for Augustus, and this is speculation, but it's speculated that he was aware that the Roman Empire could never just infinitely expand. Like, he knew this, but Germania was like the last one. They were like, yes, one more, and then we'll stop expanding. And this is what happened. They got crushed, and it's interesting that Ashton noted Arminius didn't push past the Rhine. It would have been much easier for him to recapture Germania, because he just would have been like, every time that his military would have showed up somewhere in Germania, it would have increased in size, because he could just be like, hey buddy, we're taking this stuff back, and then people just would have joined him along the way, and
that's
so
actually
it would have been much more difficult to conquer Gaul.
I want to interject, because that's actually a really important point. You remember how we mentioned that 8 of the 11 legions were taken by Tiberius? What do you think helped fill in some of the gaps of that manpower? German auxiliaries, right? So if you're a German tribesman who's allied with Rome, and you see or hear of this plot, and I know what's going to happen. You don't think that like that on a dime you're going to turn on Rome for your own sake? Of course you are, right? So it was doomed to fail. And even that's another thing when you look at Varus that you could have considered, man, is you have this plot being told to you and you look at some of your military might and a large portion of it is comprised of German auxiliary forces. Man, I'm just some dude from Canada and I wouldn't have fallen into that trap. You know what I mean? Like
yeah, and you got to think that maybe in his brain he's like, that's a good point. Maybe he knows so well that if it's true that he'll get obliterated. Do you know what I mean? Like maybe he knows in his heart that if it's true that the Germans are planning this plot against him, that he's going to lose. So he just convinces himself that it's impossible and that that's not going to happen. That could have been the case. Either way, man, this story is it's one of my favorites actually, because it's just the complete and utter destruction of a few Roman legions. And it's insane, man. And it really shows the vulnerability of Rome, which at the time had been just crushing all of their enemies. This is like Ashton said, this is entering like the golden era of Rome, right? And this is just a reminder that, no one's too big.
The bigger they are, the harder they fall, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And this is cool, man. And actually, what we were touching on, I think the other episode the other day, just our last episode, we talked about how like during the Dark Ages and these tribesmen and these people that were living in Northern Europe or in these neighborhoods were still very intelligent people, and they were still tacticians, and they still had their life together. Just because they didn't have the social structure that Rome had didn't make them any less. You know what I mean? And this is a great example of this. This is Romans getting completely tactically outmaneuvered by quote unquote barbarians, quote unquote uncivilized people. No, there's clearly civilization going on here. So it's cool.
And considering, and like we said earlier in the episode, considering how Tiberius handled them, he showed them a modicum of mutual respect, right? He understood their capabilities, and so he sought cooperation. Whereas Varus, walking around being a legislator, he didn't see them as much as... he saw them as his subjects, as was the goal of Rome, but he saw them as his subjects in a lesser than fashion, as opposed to lesser than on every level, as opposed to just, hey, we're more organized, right? And like we mentioned this in the Hunnic episode when we were talking about the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths, that's one of the most important reasons why Rome became what it did, it was one word: organization, right? Once again, just to really drive it home, the defeat at the Teutoburg forest would mark the end of Rome's attempts at Germanic subjugation on a provincial level. Wars would be waged, invasions would be executed, but never again would they attempt to incorporate this territory into the empire. During the fighting, this is actually a little fun, interesting fact about Roman legions. During the fighting and after the defeat, Rome had lost 3 of its aquilas, a standard of the legions and a symbol of Roman pride. If you've ever seen Gladiator. That's awesome movie. If you've ever seen Gladiator, when you see the guy marching, the standard bearer, and there's the eagle on the top of the standard, that's a Roman, that's an aquila. That's a Roman standard. That's a symbol of pride for the legion. And many legions had their own. Some were wolves, some were eagles, etc. Legions were like designated military units, kind of like, I'm not going to name any units because I've done this before and I made myself sound like a fool, but in the Canadian military, U.S. military, there's certain military units or brigades or whatnot that have a reputation for past deeds, right? Legions had the same. They lost the day, and the legions lost that day, and they would have their numbers retired. And I believe it was 17, 18, and 19 were the legions. And who knows, right? They were never to be used again, and perhaps it was due to being a bad omen or out of respect for the dead. And this is one of my favorite parts about this whole episode. It's said that Augustus, upon hearing of the defeat of his forces, and this was when he was an old man and normally a very stoic man, would periodically bang his head against a table or a wall out of frustration and shout, "Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions!" Like he's just fuming. Like he'd just be sitting there having dinner and be like, "Oh, this is a great, give me back my legions!" Just pissed off, right? I would
have done the same, honestly.
100%. Like, because imagine, like, we're sitting here like, bro, Varus is an idiot. Imagine how Augustus was like, he's sitting there like, how does that happen, right? Yeah. But it did.
It would have been frustrating.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, I'm happy to end it there.
Yeah, that was a good episode. That was fun. I hope you guys enjoyed this more abridged version of Human Histories. It's two dudes working full-time jobs with bills to pay and girlfriends. We don't necessarily have all the time in the world to do a 30-hour episode like we did with the Battle of Marathon or etc. But we hope we can still provide content that you find value and meaning out of and enjoy listening to. And we'd appreciate your guys' feedback. Any questions, any comments, any concerns, we'd love to hear it. We want to have that open dialogue. And before I go on with what you've heard many times before, I just want to say thank you for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Yeah, and this new style actually helps us be a bit more liberal with the way we present the episode as well. So it's got its benefits. If you guys like it, let us know. If you don't like it, let us know, and we'll do our best to make it attainable for you guys. So a couple ways to support the show, just to wind you guys out here. You guys know at this point, you just got to go to humanhistoriespodcast.com. So what we've done there is we have all the show notes available to you. We have affiliate books that we use to research this, and I'll add that book that Ashton mentioned here. And we set it up as affiliate links. So if you decide to buy those books, it's awesome and it's free for you to go through our affiliate links on our website. And that way we actually get some financial support from that. And we also have Audible there, so you can sign up for an Audible membership, which is free 30 days, and we'll actually get a bit of support from that as well. If you just want to donate to the show, you're able to do that through Patreon, which is available through the website, and that's a great way to support us and help us keep expanding this show and keep investing more time and more resources into the show. Another thing you can do is you can follow us on Instagram at Human Histories Podcast. You can follow the show because we're here every week. You can shoot us messages at questions@humanhistoriespodcast.com. You can shoot us messages on the Instagram. You can just hit us with a DM and we'll try our best to respond to you. And that's really the best way to support the show, man. If you want to give us a rating, that would be super helpful because the more ratings that are 5-star, the better. And I think we're at 7 or 8 ratings on Apple and a couple others in different places. So we'd love to get that up to, a couple hundred. That would be amazing. So
1
thanks,
million.
1 million ratings. Yeah. So thanks so much, guys. I really want to say that I just appreciate you guys listening. We've noticed our following growing slowly but surely. And it's honestly such a pleasure to be able to do this show and know that when we upload it, there's going to be people that listen to it on their way to work and learn something cool and get to hang out with us as we go over history. We hope you guys like this sort of style of creation for historical topics because we like bouncing around and doing cool new things that we haven't heard about and hopefully you haven't heard about. So those are all the great things that we're trying to do here at Human Histories Podcast. So we would love for you guys to join us as we hopefully get to 100, 200, 300 episodes, and we're here for the next 10 years making these cool episodes and doing cool stuff and expanding the show and everything that we're going to be able to hopefully do with this thing. So thanks so much, guys. This is Riley Osborne with your co-host Ashton Myers. We're the Human Histories Podcast. We'll see you next week. Thanks so much.